He was the man who killed the Persian Empire. He marched his army 22,000 miles. He never lost a single battle. To the world, he was Alexander the Great, a living god among men. But deep in the heart of Mesopotamia, in the scorching heat of Opis, Alexander faced an enemy he could not defeat with a sword. It wasn't a foreign army. It wasn't a monster from the myths. It was his own brothers. Imagine standing before the men you bled with, the men you made into kings, only to see hatred in their eyes. They didn't just want to go home, they wanted to abandon him. This is not just the story of a mutiny. This is the story of the psychological breakdown of the world's most powerful man. And the speech that followed would change the course of history forever. Why did the most loyal army on earth turn against their creator? And how did one man, with just his words, bring them back to their knees? This is the untold story of the Opis Mutiny. Before they were masters of the world, the Macedonians were nothing. Go back just one generation. Before Alexander, there was no empire, there was no gold. There was only survival. They were shepherds wandering the cold mountains. They wore animal hides because they couldn't afford cloth. They lived in fear of their neighbors, the Thracians, the Illyrians, the Greeks. They were the laughingstock of the ancient world. And then came Philip. Alexander's father, King Philip II, was a genius. He took these broken men and gave them a purpose. He gave them the sarissa, an 18-foot spear that changed warfare forever. He turned a mob of shepherds into the most disciplined killing machine history had ever seen. Under Philip, they came down from the mountains, they built cities, they grew rich. For the first time, they felt pride. But there was a problem. These soldiers, these old guard, they loved Philip, they bled for Philip. When Philip was assassinated and his 20-year-old son took the throne, they followed Alexander, but they never forgot who built the house they lived in. Alexander took them further than Philip ever dreamed. He gave them the wealth of Persia. He made them rulers of nations. But in their hearts, they were still Philip's men. And they watched with growing suspicion as their young king began to act more like the Persians they had conquered than the Macedonians they were born to be. For 10 years they had marched. They had crossed deserts where birds dropped dead from the heat. They had fought elephants in India. They had bled for him. But as they returned to Persia, the veterans began to realize a terrifying truth. Alexander didn't just want to rule the Persians, he wanted to become one. It started with the weddings at Susa. In a single day, Alexander forced 10,000 of his Macedonian officers to marry Persian women. He called it unity. The soldiers called it humiliation. But the ultimate betrayal was yet to come. While the veterans were fighting in the mud, Alexander had secretly gathered 30,000 young Persian boys. He called them the Epigoni, the successors. He dressed them in Macedonian armor. He taught them to fight with the Macedonian spear. And when these 30,000 young, strong, obedient soldiers marched into Opis, the old veterans saw their own replacements. Look at them. They are young. They are fresh. They worship Alexander like a god. And you are old. You are covered in scars. You are tired of marching. To Alexander, you are no longer the heroes. You are just baggage. The whisper spread through the camp like a disease. He doesn't need us anymore. He thinks he is too good for us. He has forgotten his father Philip. The love they had for their king turned into something dangerous. It turned into hate. The pot was boiling, and at Opis it was about to explode. It was a hot summer day in Opis. The air was thick with dust and tension. Alexander ordered all his Macedonian troops to assemble. He stood on a high platform, looking down at the men who had conquered the world for him. He thought he was giving them a gift. He smiled and announced, "Soldiers, I have decided to send the old, the wounded, and the sick back home to Macedonia. You will return as rich men, heroes to be envied by all." He expected cheers. He expected tears of joy. Instead, there was silence. Then a murmur started. It grew louder. It wasn't gratitude. It was rage. To the soldiers, this wasn't a reward. It was a firing squad. They thought Alexander was finally throwing them away to make room for his new Persian army. Suddenly, someone from the crowd shouted. Then another, "You don't need us, then send us all home. Go campaign with your father Ammon." That was the insult that broke him. They were mocking his claim to be a god. They were rejecting him. The king's face turned red. The man who had killed thousands in battle snapped. In a blind fury, Alexander didn't wait for his guards. He jumped down from the high platform, straight into the sea of angry soldiers. He grabbed the ringleaders with his own hands. He pointed them out to his guards, screaming, "Take him, and him, and him!" 13 men were dragged away to be executed immediately. The entire army froze in terror. The shouting stopped. The silence returned. But this time, it was the silence of death. Panting, covered in sweat, Alexander climbed back onto the platform. He looked at his terrified men with cold eyes, and then he began to speak. "What I am about to say isn't meant to stop you returning home. As far as I care, you can go wherever you wish. But I want you to know how you have behaved towards me, and how I have treated you. I'll begin, as is right, with my father, Philip. When he found you, you were mere peasants, wearing hides, tending a few sheep on the mountain slopes. You could barely defend them from your neighbors. Under him, you began living in cities with good laws and customs, and he turned you from slaves into rulers over those very barbarians who used to plunder your land. He conquered most of Thrace. He took the best harbors, so there was trade and prosperity. The Thessalians, they used to terrify you. Well, we rule them now. The Athenians and Thebans were so humbled that they no longer take tribute from Macedonia, but instead depend on us for their protection. He was declared supreme commander of all the Greeks for the campaign against the Persians, an honor not just for himself, but for all Macedonians. This is what my father Philip did for you, great enough on its own, but small compared to what you've gained from me. I crossed the Hellespont, even though back then the Persians still commanded the sea. I defeated the satraps of the great King Darius. I made you rulers of Ionia, Aeolis, Phrygia, and Lydia. All the riches of Egypt and Cyrene, which I won without a fight, are yours now. Syria, Palestine, Mesopotamia, Babylonia, all belong to you. The wealth of Lydia, the treasures of Persia, the jewels of India and the outer sea. What have I held back for myself, apart from this purple cloak and diadem? Nothing. No man can point to my riches, only the things I hold in trust for you all. And what would I do with them anyway? I eat what you eat. I get no more rest than you. Many times I spent the night on watch so that you could sleep soundly. Who among you believes he's worked harder for me than I have for him? Come on, if you've got scars, strip and show them to me. I'll show you mine. There isn't one part of my body, the front at least, that doesn't bear a wound. My body's covered in scars from every weapon you can think of. Swords, arrows, stones, clubs, all for the sake of your lives, your glory, and your wealth. And yet here I still am, leading you, as conqueror of land and sea. I've paid off your debts without asking how you got them, even though you're paid well enough and pillage every city we take. Any one of us who was killed, who met a glorious end, we buried with full honors. Many now stand immortalized by bronze statues in Macedonia. Their families are honored and pay no taxes. Under my command, not one man has been killed fleeing the enemy. And now I wanted to send back some of you to be welcomed back home as heroes. But since you all wish to go, then all of you, go. Go home, tell them that your king, Alexander, conqueror of the Persians, Medes, Bactrians, and Scythians, who marched over the mountains of the Hindu Kush, crossed the Oxus and Tanais rivers, even the Indus. Tell them that when you made it back to Susa, you abandoned him and went home, leaving him under the protection of the foreigners you'd conquered. Perhaps this report of yours will seem glorious in the eyes of men and worthy in the eyes of the gods. Be gone. For 3 days and 3 nights, Alexander did not leave his tent. He refused to see anyone. He refused to eat. Inside the darkness, the king waited. Outside, the silence of the army was terrifying, but they did not leave. They did not go home. Instead, the toughest warriors on earth broke down. They threw down their weapons. They took off their armor. They stood in their tunics, crying like children at the gates of the palace. They shouted to him, "We will not leave until you have pity on us." On the 3rd day, the tent flap opened. Alexander stepped out. He looked tired. His eyes were red from weeping. When he saw his men, unarmed, humble, crying in the dust, the king himself burst into tears. An old officer named Callias stepped forward and said, "O king, what grieves us is that you have made Persians your kinsmen, and they kiss you, but no Macedonian has tasted this honor." Alexander looked at them with love and said, "But I regard all of you as my kinsmen, and from this time forth I shall call you by that name." In that moment the mutiny ended, not with a battle, but with a kiss. To celebrate, they held a banquet for 9,000 people. Macedonians and Persians sat side by side, dipping their cups into the same bowl of wine. Alexander prayed for unity between the two races. It was the high point of his life, a moment of perfect peace. But history is cruel. Just a few months after this beautiful reconciliation, Alexander the Great fell ill, and within 2 weeks the man who conquered the world was dead. He was only 32 years old. The speech at Opis was not just a military address, it was his final testament. It was the last time he would truly connect with the men who made him a legend. Empires rise and fall, kings turn to dust, but the words spoken on that hot day in Opis will echo for eternity. Thanks for watching this epic journey. If you enjoyed this documentary, please subscribe and turn on notifications.